Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to just let you take it away.
Great. Hello. Thank you all so much for being here. We also have a live stream with people watching, so I'll try to remember that and not stand in front of this or that. But I'm going to go through a presentation and then really open it up for questions and also generating some ideas. So that's kind of the format of what we're going to do today. So I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement, especially because we're in this beautiful setting. So I want us all to take a moment to recognize that this land and all of Clare Housing's buildings and programs are standing on the ancestral lands of Dakota people. I like to also look at this beautiful landscape as I think about this. We want to acknowledge the Dakota, the Ojibwe, the Ho-Chunk, and the other nations of people who have called this place home. We pay respects to their elders. We acknowledge the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brought us here today. And we are grateful to this land for providing a nurturing home to so many. We're committed to working towards a future where all people have the safety and peace of a home in our shared community. So thank you for that. A couple of quick, if you haven't gotten a snack, feel free to get up. We're pretty informal. And then if you need to use the restroom, I'm sure John can point you there. John's at the back. So thank you all to the staff also for making this happen today. I'm going to start with laying the groundwork. So I've been here not quite 3 years. So I'm going to take you back to when I started in 2020 and kind of what I've encountered in that time being here. So obviously 2020 was in the midst of COVID. I was just talking to Joanne, who helped hire me, thank you, and how all things got moved online. So I was planning to come up and do all these in-person interviews, and that didn't happen. Everything was online, and I was hired, and I started, and since then, it's been a really weird couple of years. So because some of our services are licensed by MDH and DHS, we really went to the highest level of protection in our buildings and in our services. Also because we still didn't know a ton about how COVID would interact with HIV. So wanting to be really protective of the health of our residents. So that meant all the things that I'm sure many of you experienced. A lot of people moved off site. We put up barriers, plexiglass, masks, lots of cleaning things down, but just a lot less face-to-face. All of our outside services stopped. So we had mental health services coming in before that. We had meals. All of that ended pretty much within a week of time. Then, following the murder of George Floyd, our largest apartment building, Clare Midtown, had to be evacuated due to air quality and not being able to open windows. So I would say in general, the team came together despite COVID. Everybody got moved off safely and back in an amazing amount of collaborative work. But overall, 2020 and 2021, from my perspective, contained a lot of fear and isolation, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of being unsure of what do we do to keep people safe, but yet still move forward. Can we just really pause everything we're doing for 3 years and keep really fulfilling our mission? I don't know, that's really hard to do. So I would say then we rolled into 2022, which was the high point of our staffing crisis, something that a lot of you also are probably familiar with in your own work. We had people who left because they were able to find jobs and wanted to work full-time from home. You know, they didn't want to be here, they didn't want to have certain hours, and they didn't necessarily want to work directly with people. We had employment opportunities that far outweighed the number of applicants that we had coming in the door. And I don't know how to chalk this up exactly, but I think maybe because of the virtual world we just left, we've had the highest and most surprising number of no-shows, cancellations not even cancellations, just we had 10 out of 10 no-shows for a while for interviews after people had committed to coming in. So that leads to a lot of the direct staff who still were here taking on more and more shifts. Suddenly you've got the building manager doing overnights 4 nights out of the week and is still expected to do all the normal daytime intake paperwork, support services. So it was I feel like there were some tough things going on there. For me, some of the things that I learned during my first 2.5 years about Clare Housing and our staff and residents, I learned how challenging a 24/7 direct service agency is to staff at a time like the present. So thinking about staffing challenges, add on to that, you're asking somebody to work overnight or weekend overnight alone, so they're both isolated and maybe bored because there's no one else, and sometimes they might experience a fearful situation. So we're asking people to do that while we're in the midst of the whole community who's looking for staff. However, balance that with learning how essential it has been to have 24/7 staffing at our sites and how key it's been to making this program work. The viability of the buildings and the residents' health and safety has depended on having people here who know our residents and are here at any time that they might need them. So then we've evolved a little bit. Our first in-person leadership team meeting was in the late fall of 2021, the first time my staff got together in person. I happened to be at the hospital because I was early labor, which was a terrible story I don't need to get into, but I was like, you can meet without me, and they did, so good job. The first in-person all-staff meeting was held in very late 2022. So the first time that I was in a room with more than 5 or 6 staff members. And then our first in-person board meeting was in January of 2023. So that's been my experience coming into Clare, and that's just to kind of give you all, where am I coming from and what have I seen in the time I've been here? That's the lens I'm looking through. So this will all be summarized in our annual report, but I do want to highlight some impact of Clare Housing. In 2022, we housed and served 287 people, mostly people who would have few or no other housing options, and almost all who would be facing homelessness if not for having a home at Clare. I've also learned we're really good at ending homelessness for people with the longest histories of trauma and co-occurring conditions, including active substance use. So while HIV is that linking factor, for many people coming in, HIV is sort of like an afterthought at this moment. They're worried about food, they're worried about mental health, they're worried about substance use, they're worried about family, they're worried about their safety, and they're worried about their physical body. So once we can get a little stability, then we can start worrying about HIV viral loads. I think the other thing I've learned is our model of owning and operating our buildings has allowed us to be successful in serving people that do have these huge housing needs for the long term. And we can literally serve and house people that no other landlord would take into their units. And we do every day. I think there's no telling who would or wouldn't be successful in our housing until they move in. So you can see somebody in front of you or on paper and say, this will never work, or okay, this one's gonna work great. You really don't know until they have the opportunity to get housed, to start building relationships, and to start building home. And that's when you see, is this gonna work? I also have learned that Minneapolis, Hennepin County, and Minnesota desperately need more housing options, just like Clare Housing's, which is great because we know how to do it. So that's a good thing. So those are sort of my recap. We are now supporting people in 265 units of safe, affordable housing. So more than that number of people are in those units. Our capacity has grown more than 60 units during the last 2.5 years amidst the COVID pandemic, staffing shortages, and of course, inflation. And this reflects the significant and growing need for permanent supportive housing. Notice this very cool new graphic. We also now employ more than 100 people are on staff, not full-time equivalents. Lots are about half and half, part-time and full-time. So you'll see we have 12 people. The 12 is the number of people, not the housing. 12 people that are in our care homes, which many of you know of as our adult foster care program. We have 191 units within our supportive housing model, which this is one of those. This is our smallest. This is 32 units. Our largest is 45, which is Midtown. And then we also have 63 units of scattered site housing, which means we're supporting clients with services, but also with rent support, pass-through rent dollars in 63 private landlord settings across 7 county regions. So that's where we are today. I'm gonna go to the fun part about talking about our challenges, and then I'll get to the exciting part about strengths right after that. So state of the agency feels like we should talk about what's hard for us right now. Media challenges, the cost of housing and serving people has increased. We have more residents with mental health challenges and active substance use, which can result in increased damages to their units, driving up the costs and impacting their own housing stability. So while we work with people at a great length to try to keep them housed, at some point, if the danger to themselves or the property is too high, we are going to have to exit them from the program. And that's what our service staff are dealing with on the daily. Our staff pay has gone up to retain and hire new employees, going back to that staffing shortage. In some cases, the pay's gone up 25% from a starting rate in our direct service positions compared to 2019 starting rates. So that's a lot of money. We all have probably seen this maybe in the news, but to really drill it down, median rent right now for a one bedroom in Minneapolis is $1,075. And that's an 8% increase since this exact time last year. So this one is one of my favorite graphics, even though it's just zeros, because this is who we're serving. People who are at or under 30% of area median income, which for context, at that level, you're looking at $24,660 for an individual or $35,000 for a family. So when you look at people at that income rate or lower, the number of vacancies that are affordable, 0%. 0% last year, 0% this year. And that's our housing. That's what we do here. So meanwhile, all these increased costs, but government reimbursement rates for delivery of services has remained flat. And the administrative burden resulting from our funding requirements is, in my opinion, ridiculous and silly, and takes a lot of staff time away from our residents and from future program development and growth. And despite our surplus currently, state shortfalls in our largest source of HIV funding have hit us with a 20% cuts in funding this year. So that's not great. Staffing shortages are an ongoing challenge to attract and keep employees in a fiercely competitive job market, especially when the county and the city and the state can attract people at much higher rates with better health insurance. And the county's homeless system, which is intended to streamline services, ultimately creates barriers for people trying to leave homelessness and service agencies like us, but like many others, who are trying to house them. Because of this, units within our buildings remain vacant, and therefore people remain unhoused. We don't receive reimbursement for the unit or services if someone's not here, even while we have a list of over 400 people waiting to get in. This all goes back to like our system. So now we get to the financial projections for this year. So basically the cap is that the takeaway, we budgeted for 2023 with all the information we have. This is similar to 2022 as well, but we're just focused on today. And then we have some new projections based on a couple of things, government grants some of the cost of the program income that we now know won't be coming in. And the other big one, expense-wise, is in program expenses that are higher. So that includes things like rent that we're paying out to units we've already committed to. So you don't need to memorize this, but this is kind of a snapshot. It's not a dire situation in that we are a really stable organization. We have savings, which is, kudos to the previous leadership, board of directors. But we know that we can't continue year over year to operate at a $300,000 deficit. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you for money today. Not today. That's next time. Okay, so that's kind of our current challenge. Now we'll talk about our strengths, the strengths that I see from my perspective. We are fairly nimble, which is awesome. So we're able to change direction. We're able to say, hey, this is going to be an issue. What are we going to do about it now? And we're actually able to do something. One of the examples is with our nursing program, which is absolutely essential for our tenants, but also for our income revenues. When we weren't able to hire any nurses, we were able to get around the table and say, hey, let's try this differently. We need a nurse to do only a limited amount of things. Let's hire healthcare liaisons who are not nurses, who can do all the other things. And it's going great. We have 3 wonderful people in that role. Another is when we realized a lot of our units, the turns, all the expenses, just in general, we needed something different. We were able to switch property management companies, which is a challenging process, but we were able to do it. And we made that decision together collectively, and it is going better, which is great. So just a couple challenges, also an HIV funding bill, which I will talk about a little bit later. Another strength, we are engaged, as we should be, in ongoing work around equity and specifically racial equity and the impacts that it has on staff and residents in terms of both our outcomes for residents and also access to care, access to housing. And this will help drive us and into the future as we look to serve an ever widening pool of people living with HIV here in Minnesota. And despite our staffing challenges, we have an amazing team with new leaders, some of whom are here today, who've come on board in the last year, and also many former staff and current staff who have taken a leap into a new position to try something different, but also to expand their own skill set, which has turned them away from that burnout and into that exciting passion and further commitment to the agency. Also, this is a great stat. We all believe in our mission, as evidenced by the most recent all-staff survey that came in, which showed us 100%, which you don't get 100% on a survey, of staff agreed or strongly agreed that they have a good understanding of the mission and goals of the organization, which I was so excited about, and 98% expressed they are committed to our mission. If I could find those 2, I'd figure it out, but it was anonymous, so I can't go after those 2. So as mentioned earlier, the other strength is we are really good at this work, and it's the model that we have is highly effective. The continuum, the ability for us to own and operate our own buildings, it works, and we see that every day. So now I'm transitioning to what's next. State of the agency, where I think we're going. 1, we want to stay focused on our mission and keep housing and serving people who are the most vulnerable and have no other options. Also, while being HIV positive, as I mentioned, is one element that does connect our residents, it is only one of many challenges they're facing. And for some, it does feel insignificant. Because of that, it calls us to deepen our work with racial justice and systemic racism, sexism, and homophobia, which we still see today present in, again, access and outcomes, but also in stigma and the inability for some residents to come to terms with the fact they are HIV positive. Just a quick stat in terms of racial disparities in 2022, new HIV diagnoses in Minnesota, stats just came out about this a couple weeks ago, 35% of new diagnoses were among people who are white, 65% among people who are people of color, versus our population, which is 83% white and 17% people of color. That's big. That's a big difference. Specifically, when you look at the Black population, 38% of new diagnoses are in the Black population compared to 5% of our population at large. So we've got some issues that are systemic, and we think we can be part of the solution. We think housing is a part of the solution. We also want to build stronger or take on more skilled service delivery, build stronger partnerships with other providers and take on more skilled service delivery in the form of mental health services, substance use treatment, and trauma-informed care. So really going from surviving to thriving. How do we get more people to move along that continuum? We also want to stay nimble, and will stay nimble and continue to respond to the urgent community needs in a couple of ways. 1, there's an HIV outbreak going on still. First ever declared HIV outbreak in the state of Minnesota. It's still impacting hundreds of people, both here in the metro, but also in Duluth. There's a second outbreak cluster there. And it's specific to people who are using intravenous drugs, which is new. Typically, the mode of transmission through that mode is about 2 to 5 people will be newly HIV positive due to intravenous drug use. In the last 3 years, we're at 168 who are positive due to that mode of transmission. So that's a big deal. We also know that 73 of them are related to being unsheltered and living in encampments. So that's where we come in, right? That's like what we do. We want to end homelessness for people with HIV, and we want to end new transmissions. So to that end, we've received some funding to start a pilot project, which is called Clare Digs. Well, someone comes up with a better idea before it's official. Clare Digs, we received $1 million appropriation to be able to purchase and renovate a small dwelling that would serve 4 to 8 individuals who are HIV positive and associated with these outbreaks. Other than that, they don't have to go through qualifying criteria such as coordinated entry. They don't have to prove they're high priority homeless, long-term homeless, GRH eligible, CADI eligible, like fill in all the blanks of all the stuff our system requires typically. So right now we're in the process of building up the service plan and service model for that, and Olivia is here. She's figuring out how do we get the money from HUD. So we'll be able to hopefully pilot and show that true low barrier housing first models work, but it's going to take a lot of work, and we expect to learn a lot along the way. The next thing we're looking at is a expansion of our model, which again, we know is effective and works, and that we have a huge demand for. So we're looking for what we're calling Clare 5, which would add to our supportive housing apartment stock, and open up another 30 to 40 units for people who are very similar to those we serve today. And we are hopeful that we can get something in the pipeline, knowing that the pipeline can take 6 to 8 years from once you have a project to actually opening the doors. As Joanne, 6 to 8, hopefully not longer, but.
I thought it was 5 years, now it's 6 to 8.
Yeah, now it's 6 to 8, and I'm guessing it's gonna get even slower. So we wanna get that going in the pipeline. Then we also are very active and want to grow our advocacy politically and within the community, specifically advocating for better systems with fewer barriers for people that need to be served, and advocating for more HIV-specific funding, for better access to HIV transmission prevention, such as PrEP and PEP, and to creating these shorter pipelines for the creation of deeply affordable housing. So those are some areas we're going to be advocating for, probably asking our supporters to jump on and advocate with us. Our larger vision is to really end the outbreak, to be sure no person with HIV is experiencing homelessness in Minnesota, and to reach that point where fewer than 100 people with new HIV diagnoses are occurring each year. So currently we're at about 270 new HIV diagnoses. We want to see it less than 100. So this is the state of the agency today. A lot of big work in front of us, but amazing, capable staff and community of people like yourselves who are here to help us do it. We want to take advantage of the fact that we have experts in the room, and we, as you saw, we are facing a serious financial challenge or limitation, and we want to bring in more money to do more services and more housing, and we're not asking for money today, but do want your ideas. So we were talking to one donor about this event, and he challenged us and said, you got to get them to do something before they leave. So that's the challenge, is to ask for all of your thoughts, ideas. What are we not seeing? What are the stones we haven't turned over? How do we continue to stay financially viable long-term and continue to grow services? We're not going to close down shop. We want to figure out how to do it more sustainably than ever while keeping growth in mind. So that's the ask. I'm done with my formal presentation, but I want to say we have multiple people in the crowd, including our CFO, to answer complicated financial questions if you have any, but also a lot of other staff, our program director, mental health services director. So that ends my presentation, but I'm opening it up for your questions from online, and your ideas about where we can go next, especially related to our financial situation. So
I have a question right away.
Yeah, David.
I probably should know the answer to this as a former board member, development committee member, but I don't know that I do. have we approached the community foundations?
Great
Minneapolis
question.
Foundation, St. Paul Foundation, I forget the name at the moment of the,
Minnesota Foundation.
yeah, well, there's that, and who's the one, is that it? Is that the one that's?
The Dayton one?
The Dayton one, yes. Have we been working those angles as well?
So I'll throw it to Jenny, our Director of Advancement.
Yeah, repeat the question.
Oh, I'll repeat the question. I forgot. I'm kind of close to a mic. So the question is for the online folks. The question is if we've approached the various foundations across the state of Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, some of the big funders out there, and kind of what our relationship is with that.
The answer is sort of. I think there's more we could do. So often the only way in, or the most direct way in, is through their RFP process. So we keep an eye on that to see if there's opportunities, and so far there really hasn't been anything that was an obvious fit that would have been a stretch. But I think because there are so many resources at those foundations that are not just kind of the usual grant channel, especially with their donor advised funds, their philanthropic advisors that you can develop relationships with. So I think there's more that can happen there. It's just kind of figuring out really the right way in.
Yeah.
And sort of looking at like seasoned development friends here. So
Well, in the spirit of brainstorming, another one that I forgot to mention was Matt P., Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies. And they, I know, were doing some specific things, the intersection between where COVID and the COVID pandemic was impacting particularly communities of color. I don't think it would be real hard to draw the connections also between that and Clare Housing.
That's great. I know we approached them about a different initiative and didn't get anywhere, but I have not heard of that one. That's great.
I don't know what their plans are currently, but.
Love it. Thank you. Hi. Hey, Terry.
Yeah, is our current or future funding forecast some of the social stuff that we're experiencing with the buildings kind of getting older, as they age out, some of the facilities, the utilities, some of the hardscape, the windows, the boiler.
Yes. Yeah. So interestingly, all of our repeat the question. The question is sort of how are we planning longer term financially as our buildings get older and we see some failures with like heating and just general big systems within the building. So we are at the end of we have 4 of those big tax credit projects, this being our first, as I mentioned. And this is out of our tax credit period. So 15 years is the amount of time that we're acting as a 1% owner while the funder really is a silent owner. That means on this property, they're out and it's just Clare Housing now operating this building. So our next step, which we tried 2 years ago and are working on again this year, is to submit a second application for tax credits that would actually be a renovation of the existing building. What that does is it allows us to do the upkeep that needs to be done. It is frustrating as 2 years ago they said, well, yes, you meet all the criteria and you actually score really well, but your building's just in too good of shape to go through the renovation yet. So just keep waiting until it's in really bad shape. So we are trying this year again, and we will keep trying each year until we get tax credits awarded where we can do some system updates. But also a big part of the tax credit funding is they cover an operating reserve and a capital reserve. So that's really projected to last only 15 years. So after that, there's no money sitting there to do things like unit turns or the AC goes out of the boiler. The elevator is one that we have on the list to be replaced. And so while it would also do some major repairs, we'd also go back to having a capital and an operating reserve. So that's where we're at with this building. We do have a couple of buildings that are expending their funds faster than we had budgeted, so we're not going to even get to that 15-year mark. And in those cases, we have been doing advocacy around the real cost of providing supportive housing, which means staffing, but also capital unit costs. And we are hopeful that one of the new pieces of legislation that just passed is actually going to help supportive housing providers like us to build back their capital reserves. But a lot it all has to go through Minnesota Housing Finance Authority, and it's like $50 million. So I think that we'll get a teeny little bit, if anything, and it's probably a couple years out. So one thing we are doing with our new building is looking at how can we change the forecast so we know we can get to that 15-year mark or longer with service dollars, because our last two are the most vulnerable, and partially that's because we don't have nursing services on site, which we are not allowed to have because of changes at DHS. That's probably more than you wanted to know. But so the structure with tax credits is really to go back in. If we were a for-profit developer, we would say like, oh, we no longer have to have these be affordable. We'll redo them and make them high-end condos, and we got enough money in rent to pay for it. But that's not what we are or our mission, and so we'll continue to go in for those state-funded supports, which allow us to keep operating another 15 years. Yes.
Shocked to hear me have a question.
So on the topic of systems that are created to help people not actually working the way they're supposed to, one thing that jumped out at me in the presentation was this problem of the long waiting list of people that need your services stacked up against all the vacancies that you've got. And that's both a human tragedy, and at the same time, it's also a financial burden. Apparently, you can't, not billing anybody for those empty apartments. What can be done about that?
Oh, this is my dad, by the way.
So he asked the hard question.
Yeah, great question, and he was not pre-planted. So, no, so that's something I've been, repeating the question is looking at the real tragedy behind having open units and having people who are waiting to get units. What can be done to help fix that problem or make it better? So I have a personal, I believe that our coordinated entry system is really a major part of the problem, which is a county system that the county across the country, if you received HUD dollars for homeless services back in, I think, 2008 or 12, you were required to put some new things in place, some standards that would help create better access and shared resources between providers, so that it wasn't, I think a lot of the idea is like, we're gonna cherry pick is the common phrase, like the easiest to serve. That was like, okay, we're gonna make sure that doesn't happen by creating a really transparent system about who gets served and why. And what that looks like here, in my opinion, is what, to me, it looks like mostly all wrong doors. You can't find the services you need or the provider you need unless you go to the one right person who can do your assessment, asks the right question about if you're HIV positive or not, and gets you on the priority list, which means that then they can refer you back to us. So the system is lengthy. There's a lot of players involved. And I think that advocacy needs to be done to force the county to change the system, to make it simpler. They can still adhere to the HEART Act requirements without making it this complicated. And I know recently an article came out, Joanne sent it, and said there's something like 300 chronic homeless people in Minneapolis, and that's gonna all be gone in 2 years. There'll be nobody who's chronically homeless. And that's true if you say, now we're gonna take the definition of homelessness and make it really, really, really narrow. And the only people that fit in here, the 300 that we can show have certain things, have a disability, have a documented disability, have 12 months of uninterrupted homelessness, have, all these things. That's the group they're looking at. And I think I'm excited and looking forward to working with some of the other homeless service providers who are all in the same boat, especially the permanent supportive housing providers, to say together as a coalition, we need and we owe it to our community to demand that the county takes responsibility for changing this system. Whether or not that will help, I don't know. Meanwhile, we have eked our way in. So one thing we were prohibited from when I started was assessing someone's need. because it would have been unfair for us to assess someone who's HIV positive and then also house them. That was a conflict of interest. It really just doesn't make sense, right? So after much work, we now have a staff member who was allowed to become an assessor. So when people call and ask for housing, we don't have to say, you have to go to this one agency somewhere in St. Paul and let them do the assessment, and maybe they'll get you back to us. So now we can actually get somebody assessed, but again, within limits. They have to be single, they have to be in Henry County, et cetera. So we're finding little ways in, but I think it absolutely needs to be a sort of call from the community, with Clare being part of it, and just saying this isn't real. Like, this system ending chronic homelessness isn't real right now. Yes.
I think I can answer that question. Hi.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, your question, I think I can really relate to, because, I mean, I've been diagnosed since 2013. And I was diagnosed, I've been homeless over I've been homeless about 10 times. Okay, I was through a very bad depression. When I found out to where I almost lost my kids, I lost my family and everything. So I was when I got sick, they kept going to nursing home, to where I went into a group home. And I got qualified for a group home because they had set me up to a program through the county as far as county waivers. So once you got county waivers, once you diagnosed with these diseases and stuff, they help you do application, they help you get housing, private housing. I've been on the waiting list for almost 3 years. I just got it to here Monday. So I've been grateful. I'm proud of myself because this is a good opportunity for me to build my self-esteem back, to build my family back, to build my depression back because I was lost. Being in a group home is still depression that makes you still lost. But now I'm in here, I feel comfortable in here, and it's like I've been waiting for a long time. I ain't think I'll make it to my own place. I ain't think I can get out that situation. But it is programs that help people that really that want to be helped. You can't help them, they don't want to be helped. So from the county, like they do like assessments. They got programs in here now that do like you won't have to go on the waiting list for a long time to get service now. It's not a program that a lot of people don't even know about. If you got a calibrator, that calibrator supposed to help us. Like my calibrator helped me get into this program, but I've been on the waiting list for 3 years. I'm here now. And I appreciate everybody because it's a hard disease that we take it into when you got kids that graduated, got grandkids you gotta look after, what I'm saying? I mean, I want to give up, but thank God I did it because y'all service really helped me, show me that I could do this. So I appreciate you guys.
Thank you. So, thank you so much.
No
Thank
problem.
you. Yes, Joanne.
You talk about the whole housing first,
Oh, yeah.
and for people who don't necessarily know,
Yep.
and then what are those challenges that you have
Yeah.
in doing the housing first?
Yeah. Okay. Question was, talk about housing first. What kind of challenges we face with the housing first model? So, housing first has always been a tenet of Clare from the time we started. And then I think it didn't have that language at the beginning, and now there's language around what that means. And so you probably hear it about a bunch. Housing first basically comes out of the era when homeless services and housing used to require certain things before you could get into the housing, and some still do. So you had to require sobriety, you had to require, maybe if you're at a shelter, you have to take 2 months of how to live independently class and show that you got your certificate before you could move out. Anything that would be a requirement prior to saying you're ready for housing. So housing first really said, nope, housing comes first, and then you can help people work on these other goals. Then you can help people work with sobriety, or you can help them work on completing education and learning how to deal with a landlord. And so it's really about acknowledging that when you're in chaos and you're unsheltered, it's really hard to get other stuff done. It's possible, but it's like superhuman to get it done. And once you have a housing where you can actually lock up your bag, you know that you're going to be able to come home and sleep for the night because no one's going to be in your place. that then you start to be able to really help people achieve their broader goals. So that has always been our model. I'm still surprised there's lots of housing that does still require sobriety or other requirements in order to come in. Another example would be not at all of them, but in some faith-based housing, you have to attend services on Sunday or things like that in order to stay housed. So it's just kind of a range of requirements. Of course, there are challenges when people do come in and haven't been housed for a really long time and maybe haven't had any like prep on how to work with a landlord or take care of a unit. So we do see once in a while when we have somebody coming in who's been unsheltered for years and years, they come in and they do not stay. Like they'll come to their unit, maybe leave some stuff, and then they're like, whoa, I'm alone, I don't have anybody around, and I'm worried about this person that I used to take care of on the street, and I'm gonna go back and do that because this is too foreign to me. So we do encounter that sometimes. And then we also, because we don't have sobriety requirements or treatment requirements, we are serving a lot of people who are actively engaged in substance use, which is really hard on them and on those around them. And our whole tenet around Housing First is first, you have to be safe. You have to feel physically safe. It's that, hierarchy of needs. And then let's start relationship building so you know that you can trust the person at the front desk. You can actually admit to the nurse how much you're using. Then the nurse can help you figure out, or the support services manager, whoever is here on staff can help you figure out, okay, if you're using at that time, let's have you take your meds at this other time. Or, let's see if we can get you some more water during the day so you're actually a little more hydrated. So that's where you start working in the harm reduction pieces too. Yeah, so we see it works. We also, we know it works and it makes sense. If you don't have housing, right? If you didn't know where you're going tonight, it'd be really tough to focus on all the other goals.
I would just also add the other challenge kind of from the other side is around funding. I think most of our kind of inner community really understands the importance of Housing First, but I think a lot of funding sources don't necessarily. And when they're looking at funding programs, their focus is on self-sufficiency. So the expectation is, you can do these things, but people better get a job. Like there's an expectation that there's going to be an outcome that means it's a bootstraps kind of thing. So it does, I think, in some ways limit some types of funding. Just another kind of challenge.
And it's true that even though a lot of people support low barrier housing, so people coming in who are using, one thing we have confronted in the funding landscape, the philanthropic landscape, is that we don't serve a lot of children. And so the population that we're serving are mostly 18 plus, and many are actively using, and it's just there's not a ton of funders out there, but that's the priority of their funding. So that's just another reality of kind of where we have to focus.
I seem to recall at some point in time there was a fairly large amount of money in the bank. What's the status of that, if that is ringing a bell?
Yes, Mark, who is a former board member and current committee member, asked, there used to be a bunch of money in the bank. What happened to that? We spent it all. Just kidding. We really didn't. We actually, a few years ago, the finance committee did create an investment policy so that we would have some long-term reserves. So I'll let, if you're okay, Mike, take more of the detail, but we have a 3-tiered investment policy that's actually working for Clare right now. He's coming. And Mike is our CFO.
Hi, everybody.
This there is good.
It's right here. Okay. First of all, thank you all for joining us. So, fighting a little cold, maybe. Excuse me. Yes, we do have those funds there. We've invested them in Schwab. We have a medium term, a short term, and a long term fund. When Phoebe showed those finances, I'm a finance guy, and I see numbers like that, and I kind of get really nervous to see us losing that kind of money. It's not sustainable, and we are tapping into those reserves to cover operations. We recognize that that's not sustainable. The dollars that there was a huge bequest that was given to us several years ago. Those dollars are still there. There's additional dollars. We have an investment portfolio that's worth about $2.7 million. So it's pretty significant. But if we keep losing money year after year, eventually that's going to go away. So as Phoebe's been talking about the different challenges that we have and the different opportunities that are ahead of us, we are very confident we can get to a financial sustainability situation at some point. It's going to take a little bit of time, and we may have to tap into those reserves more than we want, but we're doing it very judiciously, very conscious of what we're spending those dollars on, and we're looking for all the different opportunities with foundations and so forth. Foundations alone aren't going to solve the issue. We got to look at things structurally as well. So a lot of discussions going on to address that.
And that was that bequest was about $1 million, which was the largest gift and unexpected bequest to Clare. So as Mike said, it's all still there. Yes.
I'm going to come at this from a little bit different angle. I'm wondering, Clare Housing has a lot of expertise built up over decades of work. Isn't there an opportunity to license some of that or to manage other people's, so you're being a management company rather than being the asset owner?
Well, that's such a good question. We just recently, the leadership team met to talk. Oh, sorry, repeating the question is, Clare has a lot of expertise we've built up over 30 years, and could we use that in a different way as a consultant or to leverage that and not just look at being the property developer? Is that okay? So yes, and we're just starting to sort of think, I think, a little more creatively about that. The leadership team recently got together around the same question and said, what are the opportunities we're missing and where could we make the biggest difference, both mission and impact financials? And so we started to kind of have that. And one thing, don't like take me to the bank on this, but one thing that came out of it, for example, was really exciting to think about is some of our hospice end of life care. So we've been doing that since day one. And we have caregivers who are amazing at it. And we have had people who've been in the homes that have said, I would like to come here to die, because that's the kind of care I'm seeing that you're giving. So we just started saying, like, what does that mean? Could we take that skill and bring it to a broader community? Could we help people stay in their homes and pass away in their homes, and we could bring our expertise? So we're just starting to like crack that door open a little bit. And I think there's a lot more there to say, how do we take what I said sort of flippantly was like, well, no one is paying anybody to be really good at providing permanent supportive housing to end homelessness, right? There's no money in it if we went beyond HIV, but that's not necessarily true. It just feels like it. Yeah, I think so. I'm really excited to keep saying, what else are we really good at? For example, low barrier housing and trauma-informed care. We're also really good at navigating the line between we provide services to people with HIV and we recognize that many people are not out about their HIV status, which is a tricky place to be. And I think we do that really well too. So there's just we've talked about some training, what could we do? I love that. We got to keep growing that. Any questions online, Nikki?
Just someone said, thank you for your great leadership, Phoebe. I love your various efforts to make a strong organization even stronger.
Oh, that's nice. I thought they said, I love your hair. Just kidding. Yes.
I'm going to ask another question. You kind of implied that you would like our political help.
Yeah.
Yes. So with whom and what kinds of help and how do we start?
Awesome. Okay, another question was, I did imply like your political help, and questions with whom and on what and how do we get started. So just last year, we started an advocacy list, so we can send, thanks to Stephanie, we can send calls to action out to people. This last 6 months, 5 months have been focused really on the current Minnesota legislature. And one thing, another sort of system that I encounter that I feel is broken is the two-party system being so entrenched in like things that when it comes to things that I know, when it comes to things that it should not be partisan, they both have a side. And so we've made inroads with some legislators, but we haven't made an inroad with really the larger like DFL party. And that impacts us when it comes to licensure and some get into it around specifically being able to provide nursing services within our buildings. So actually, I will take a moment to say how this is connected. Our first two buildings, this one in Midtown, have nursing services on site, which make it possible to stay even financially. Our other two buildings do not, and that's because of this DHS change, because they would like anyone who's providing on-site nursing to be an assisted living building. We are not an assisted living building. We're a beautiful apartment building where some people have nursing and some people don't. So this has been a battle for years that we're working with DHS, and what has happened is the DFL party has said, well, this is a disability rights issue and everyone should be under the same requirements and the same protections. And so therefore you should become assisted living, which in our case, we're not able to do with tax credits. You're not allowed legally. So we would have to exit everybody with nursing. To where? I don't know, because there's nowhere to go. So it's those things that we're like, it's a complicated issue. People are entrenched in this like one side. And so we need meetings with legislators who are willing to listen to the detail and just listen to the detail. So for example, I think in the winter we had 6 meetings set up with different legislators, 6 or 8, and 1 showed. And I think if you all are at the table helping bring them there, and we would, they were people who are in this district, or so that kind of help would be great. That's a big piece, and it is complicated. But then there's some other simple stuff that this HIV funding bill that just got passed for the first time since 1998. The legislature put more money into HIV for the first time in like 3 decades. So that was a big deal, and we're going to celebrate. It was a one-time funding bill, so we want to go back and ask for more next year and the year after, because we just aren't seeing the declines that other states are seeing in HIV, and some states are seeing increases, which we don't want to go there either. So that's a really obvious one, and that's going to be a real focus in the next couple of years. But I also think on the local side, it's also looking at what is the real cost of housing when it comes to supportive services, and can the county and the city also play a role? Because right now they just, go to MHFA or go to DHS, and it's got to take. I just talked to a housing provider yesterday who has to close down a permanent supportive housing building because they can't afford staffing. And they told everybody for 2 years, and now they're all surprised. So it's like we need help also on the local funding support.
Can I speak to the question?
Which, yes,
the
go for
question
it.
is gentleman right here. So, aside from Phoebe's father, I used to run a nonprofit for many years. And people are very frustrated with the legislature because it seems mysterious, and it seems like they answer to the tune of the big businesses like Mayo currently and Northwest Airlines and people like that. My experience is that, I'm assuming most of you live in Minnesota. Most of you here live in Minnesota. Most of you are supporters of Clare Housing. Your legislator and your senator run for office every 2 or 4 years. And if you twist their, not right now because they're in the final days of the legislative session, but a couple weeks from now, their bids will go off for months and months and months. You twist their arm a little bit, they'll come with Clare Housing, with you. You set up, call Phoebe, she'll make it, or whoever. Once you connect with these people, it doesn't take that much. They don't understand. It's they got a lot of stuff on their mind over there. It's a big mess. Once you connect with them to a specific site, to a specific individual, they see what can happen, you can really turn those people into big advocates. Both at the county level, county commissioners, but also at the state legislature, and maybe Congress people too, but it's not that hard. It just takes a little effort. And everybody here in this room could do that.
And we do.
Yeah. That's a great, oh, something's going on with the remote. So we are gonna keep growing that advocacy call to action, but that's absolutely right. We haven't been able to get a county commissioner to any of our events and ribbon cuttings and all of those. So we're gonna keep pushing now because we got a lot of voices here and beyond this room that care about what we're doing. We just have to leverage it better, I think, and more consistently. Yes.
I was just gonna add to that they work for us, so speak up often
They
and.
don't always remember that.
Well, I was told recently by people at the Aliveness Project when I was asking, do we bother these people that aren't our representatives? It's like, yes, call them again, and that seems silly, but that's what we gotta do, so if things need to change, we can, and that's something the advocacy list can help with, is finding messaging points, so when you do call, you don't think about it.
And is there money available on the city level? City council members as well? Is that also on the advocacy hit list?
So I want to go after city council a little bit more on the land, like use of land. And also I don't need to get into it here because it's huge, but the city policing makes a huge impact on our residents and on our properties. The lack of city policing. And so I think there's a couple of requests there to really talk about like, what is the city doing to really house and keep people safe who need it the most? So there's that, but there's also, again, like we've approached them about potential sites that the city owns, and that would be another great way that they could participate with us. Maybe one, if there's any other questions, we're at 6 and we're being very respectful of time. If there was one other one, I will take it, but I don't think so. I don't see anybody jumping out of their chair. Okay, so I just want to thank you so much, and we would love your feedback. I don't know if we have a way to get it specifically, but I know many of you in this room, and I can email you, or we can email you and get some feedback for next year, future times that we do this. But really appreciate you being here. I know that it means a lot to actually come in person and take the time, and so I'm grateful, and thank you to all the staff as well, and to others that spoke up today. Thank you for being here, and have a great night.
Please feel free to try to connect. Not really.